Tom Clancy is known for his fiction, The Hunt for Red October, The Cardinal of the Kremlin, Executive Orders, just to name a few. But he's recently embarked on a nonfiction series looking at commanders of the armed forces. His first installment focused on the Army. This time he is taken to the skies. Every Man a Tiger is the book he has written with General Chuck Horner. Horner was commander of the U.S. and Allied Air Forces during Desert Storm. Together they provide a look at a service that has reinvented itself and in the process changed the nature of war in the last decade of this century. I am pleased to have both of them on this program at this time. I got a lot of questions about the air power, but let me just what's the idea for this? What are you trying to do with these series?
The fundamental objective of the series is to let people know what it's like to be a general officer. You know, what it's like to have stars up here on your shoulders. To show people the intellectual dimension of that, because you have to be pretty smart to be a general, and the human dimension of it. You know, I mean, you can't be an effective commander unless you have real feelings for the people under you, because you're putting their lives at risk.
Why'd you choose Chuck Horner then?
Well, he was there, and
why'd you choose Chuck Horner? It sounded like I was saying, why could you ever have chosen him? But
he's one of the best fighter pilots ever lived,
right?
According to another friend of mine who's also very good, and he was the commander of the air war. He demoed all the stuff that I write about.
And Desert Storm.
Correct,
yeah.
yes.
You were also a pilot in Vietnam for 110 missions. Coming out of Vietnam, what was the lesson that you carried with you?
We had a lot of lessons. One of them is the importance for the services to work together, because in Vietnam we didn't do it very well. One of them was to have integrity, because the first casualty in Vietnam was the truth. We lied about what we were doing because of the way we were centralized in the command. For example, the military didn't pick the targets, the White House did. And I think also the fact that you cannot go at war incrementally. If you're going to embark on this immoral thing called warfare, you better go at it hard and get it over with as soon as possible. You owe it to the people fighting the war, and you owe it to the enemy whose lives you're taking, whose country you're destroying. I think those are our major lessons.
Yeah, those were, most of those you shared with General Powell, who's also a Vietnam War veteran, served 2 terms over there. The idea, if you're going to fight a war, choose your goal, choose your end strategy, and go all out.
That's right.
Do you two differ over anything in terms of...
well, he likes the Army a hell of a lot more than I do.
And you like the Air Force a lot more than he does.
Well, of course, but I'm right.
All right, well, that brings me to Kosovo. Clearly, this is a place, as you know, it'd be silly for me to assume everybody doesn't know that there is a bet on air power. Right. Will that bet pay off?
Well, I think, first of all, you got to take a look at military power. You have to say, what's my political objective? What am I trying to achieve? And then you have to ask the question, is that achievable using military force? If the answer is yes, then the answer of how to use force, what forces to use, is very easy. You do the best mix of air, land, sea, and space. But if your political objective cannot be achieved using military force, then all your other attempts to use military force are going to be confused and misdirected. Look what happened to us in Vietnam. I worry that we didn't adequately address the first question, and now we're trying to solve it in the second case by either using air power alone, or mixing air and land, or using a sea embargo, or all these things. So we're headed for some frustrating times.
But what are they? What are the frustrating times we're headed for?
Well, I think if we're trying to say, okay, we'll do it with air power alone, well, maybe that's not the right strategy. So let's do some of this, and maybe put some special forces on the ground to find the targets.
Put some Apache helicopters
put some Apaches in. And so we're kind of upping the ante incrementally. Right. And as if we had probably a clear vision where we're going at first, we would have done it right in the opening minutes.
In other words, going all out in the beginning and saying, yes, we'll use ground forces if we have to. Nothing is off the table, but we're coming at you strong right now with everything we got.
And that's what we did in the Gulf War.
Do you think we didn't do it? The Gulf War also was a tribute to George Bush and his skill at bringing everybody together.
Exactly right. And this is not to denigrate the folks doing this job in Kosovo or even the political leadership. NATO is a long-standing command relationship, and you have 15, 18 nations that all feel they have prerogatives, which they do. So what you have is you have a commander working for 15 or 18 or whatever many bosses, and that's tough.
19.
That's tough. George Bush gave us clear guidance, liberate Kuwait. That was reaffirmed by the UN, the United States Congress. We had a coalition of political leadership formed by President Bush because he was willing to listen to the other countries, King Fahd, for example, Saudi Arabia. As a result, we had a clear-cut political goal. It was militarily achievable, and then the military was allowed to strategize on how best to accomplish the job.
On this program, I've talked to President Bush and General Scowcroft about that and about the sort of, everybody talks about the last day. Mm-hmm. Should this war have gone on for another day while we're talking about Desert Storm, at least another day, another two, to make sure the Republican Guard was decimated and couldn't rise again?
Well, I think that's obviously, you can answer that both sides of the coin. But I think you have to look at it this way. Iraq was pretty well debilitated. It's not a military threat to its neighbors today. In fact, he has trouble maintaining power. Now, someday again, it may rise again to be a real problem in the region. But that would have happened anyway, it just might have taken longer. On the other hand, we had people who were dying in the desert. They were stepping on landmines or picking up unexploded ordnance.
You mean Allied people
our,
the Allied
soldiers,
side, right?
Our men and women. And the kind of answer that the American people have to ask is, how many more Americans do we want to trade for one more Iraqi tank or whatever? With
great respect for you, that doesn't seem to me about why they made the decision. I mean, they made the decision almost on the other reason. For the other reason is that General Powell had said it's like a turkey shoot. As you watch those troops going back to Iraq, your planes were coming over and.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
You were there, and I wasn't. I'll give you that.
No, but we had the highway of death.
Right.
Well, it was really the highway of destruction because most of the Iraqis got out of their vehicles and walked home. But you know, you are subject to the impact of media, and there's no doubt about it. All that wreckage being shown on television may have caused people to say, "Are you beating a tethered goat?" And the answer is, well, what we did was legitimate. Maybe it's excessive. I don't think so.
What do you think of Clancy's knowledge of military strategy and military affairs?
I'm in absolute awe of Tom Clancy as a military historian and as a man with one-liners. He makes Henny Youngman look like Carl Sandburg.
Really? Are you in awe, really? I mean,
yeah, the man knows what he's talking about.
Does he really?
Yes, he does.
Where does he get it, you think? Then?
He reads.
He reads. Yeah. And he's got his buddies he talks to.
A few.
A few. All right. You think the bombing in Kosovo is an ill-fated adventure?
Look, I believe with the Weinberger doctrine, you don't apply force unless you have a vital national interest. I don't see that we have a vital national interest in Yugoslavia. And if you don't have the vital national interest, what are you killing people for?
And it's not a vital interest in terms of what Milosevic might have been doing to the...
Okay, Charlie,
let me finish.
Charlie, 20 years ago, Pol Pot killed 1/3 of the population of his country with hose and rakes and sticks because he didn't want to expend the money to use bullets. Okay, 1/3 of his population. It's probably an all-time qualitative
but
human
the fact
record.
that nobody did anything
and
that
we didn't
time
do anything
does
about
not justify not doing something now.
But where do you draw the line? And what is our national interest?
Well, the national interest is that great nations.
Fundamental question is this, Charlie.
Have to.
Okay, before you commit our forces to battle, you better know what you're going to write to Mrs. Smith when you have to send her a letter saying Lieutenant Smith or Private Smith got killed. Mrs. Smith, this is why your son had to die. Now, what is the answer to that question today in Yugoslavia? I don't know.
You don't know.
No. Why did your son have to die? You better know the answer to that before you send him out there to get killed.
But do you think? The argument would be made, and clearly, one of the problems the president has tried to make that argument because it was unacceptable what Milosevic was doing to the Albanians.
Pol Pot was?
No.
Or what happened in Rwanda and Burundi was?
Failures of the past does not justify the conduct of the future, and you know that as well as anyone.
Okay.
Having said that, my question really goes to the heart of whether there is any time that the United States has an obligation to morality, has an obligation to its own preeminence when there is not a threat to our national interest.
Unless there's a threat to our national interest, we do not have the moral right to ask our people to die.
So unless it's...
when a soldier joins the Army or the Air Force or the Navy or the Marine Corps, he swears an oath to the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah. Apply that then to Vietnam, for example.
We had a treaty obligation, and we thought it was in our national interest. It probably was not.
We thought it was in our national interest. We had a treaty obligation.
And treaties, in accordance with the Constitution, the highest law of the land, because they have to be ratified by the Senate. And the President Johnson made the decision that was in our national interest, a vital national interest. Probably he was wrong in the hindsight of history.
But I mean, so then President Johnson should have had a hard time telling any American mother that your son was lost in Vietnam.
Correct.
I think he did. In fact, he reached a point where he wouldn't run for office again.
Of course, I mean, he said, I will not run for re-election because, well, I'm not sure it was, because he thought that he couldn't heal the division.
He thought he was going to lose.
And because he, thought it was at the New Hampshire primary, and he thought he couldn't heal the division.
Actually, he won the New Hampshire primary.
I know he did.
That's fiction created by the media.
But McCarthy did much, much better than they ever thought he would do as a challenger to a sitting president. Right?
Fine. Yeah.
Let me come back to this business about the Air Force. Today's Air Force, are we depleting the resources by what we're doing over there? I mean, is there some risk to the United States in terms of...
Well, obviously we're depleting the resources, but that isn't the issue. The issue is what condition are our forces in? And, for example, to initiate the action in Kosovo, we had to shut down the overflight of North Iraq.
My point.
So, in other words, the forces we had in theater were insufficient for 2-plane flyby. And again, we're running out of air-launched cruise missiles. We're going to be short on GPS-guided bombs. I look at the Army deploying down there, and the 2 accidents there would indicate to me that we have a readiness problem with regard to our training of our aviators. So I think the whole issue of where have we been since, 1986 when we started the cuts? The force we have now is not the force we took to Desert Storm and Desert Shield. It's a much smaller force, and it's also been worked much harder, going to all these different deployments. And what's happened is people have been voting with their feet and getting out. Readiness is down, spares are down, flying hours down, training's down.
Are you concerned then about America's military posture?
Well, I've been here before. I was here in the late 50s, and I was here in the late 70s. So it's not unexpected. This is the nature of a democracy, and when the people lose interest in defense because there's no apparent overwhelming threat out there, these things happen. But I'm optimistic over the long term.
Let me raise this. I'll come back to Kosovo with both of you. Now that we're in it, what are our options? And what would you recommend? Now that we're there, now that we are where we are.
Okay, the problem is now that the president has, for better or worse, I think for worse, has committed the prestige of the United States to a war in which we have no interest. Do we continue? The question is, what are we trying to accomplish? What constitutes the victory we're supposed to be working for? How do you win something like this? Somebody else is going to have to define that in political terms, because I don't know the answer to that, Chuck, Charlie. I don't know what constitutes winning in a war like this.
Well, I think the problem we face, we're in it. We've got to work through it. It's not going to be clean, the solution. I think what will happen is, as long as Milosevic keeps the murder and the rape, organized rape, and the refugees flowing out, and that appears on national news, international news, the people in the democracies that make up NATO are going to support this operation. So we have that going for us in terms of strategy. Over time, we will inflict sufficient damage on Yugoslavia that there will be an opportunity for them to make some compromise. But I think in the end, we've got to be stuck with sitting people on the ground there, trying to keep people safe from destroying one another.
Some kind of international peacekeeping force.
That's right. And it's going to run a long time. So we'll work our way through this. It's not going to be pretty, the solution, and we're going to pick up a big bill.
Help me understand this. I think Brother Clancy would like an answer, too. What? Can you imagine? Explain to me what happened in the bombing of the Chinese embassy.
Obviously, it was a stupid mistake. People make stupid mistakes. Now, the problem is everybody's out for blood. And you got to be careful about that, because if you tell your intelligence agency, if you make a mistake, we're going to fire you all or castigate you, then pretty soon they're not going to do intelligence. And in combat, it all starts and ends with intelligence. It's the most important thing we do in building military strategy. The execution's easy. It's knowing what to do that's hard. And so we've got to be careful. We need to learn from this mistake. We've got to say, oops, we really booted this one. Yeah. On the other hand, we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I agree with everything you just said, but my question is, do you accept the explanation that the CIA probably gave them, that they were operating on a map that was out of date? You can imagine that to be true.
That sounds very reasonable, knowing how they operate.
Does that strike you as?
Charlie, I have this one on Clancy's laws, is Clancy's law of accidents, which is the only difference between a wise man and a fool is the magnitude of his mistakes. Somebody goofed. To err is human, and to forgive is divine. And in this case, somebody goofed.
I'm just trying to understand this is a reasonable goof to make. I mean, this is
Doctors make mistakes,
goof,
cops make mistakes, the FBI makes mistakes, the CIA makes mistakes.
No one has said that everybody doesn't make mistakes, but we are saying, is this the kind of mistake that might be made that nobody would check to see if this was an up-to-date map?
I could make the case, okay, the Chinese stole millions and millions of work years and nuclear secrets,
right.
So we're going to bomb our embassy in Yugoslavia because we had the
Beijing is what we did. We nuked Beijing.
Well, but, that's too complex for Americans. We're not that swift.
All right. Let me go back to you, sir. Look at this. This is a rather nice picture there, huh?
Well, those are our stand-ins. We're neither one of us really that good.
Stern purpose there in the back photo. You'd rather write fiction?
That's what I'm best at, yeah.
No, would you rather write it or because you're better at it? Or would
you don't have to check your facts when you write fiction.
This book is called Every Man a Tiger, which means?
Fighter pilots are all tigers.
Yeah.
Fighter pilot is a guy who knows he's the best aviator since Wilbur Wright.
Did you feel that way?
Well, you have to if you're going to take off and face somebody in the air.
Otherwise, you won't be coming home.
That's right.
Tom Clancy and General Chuck Horner, Every Man a Tiger is the book, nonfiction. We'll be right back. Stay with us.